In tijden van oorlog en geweld pleit ze voor een actieve geweldloosheid. Handen uit de mouwen dus, voor de vrede.
Hildegard Goss-Mayr, you and your late husband have devoted 40 years of your lives to spreading the ideas of active non-violence, and you've become well known for that. Now, how did you get interested in these ideas?
Yeah, I should like to say that this is part of my life story, because I grew up as a child in Austria, in Vienna, and my father had been in the peace movement before, and he worked for German-Polish relationships. And then when in 1938, when Austria was taken over by Hitler regime, of course those who had worked with Slavic nations were persecuted, discriminated, and pacifists were against, not well considered by the regime, on the contrary. And so our family lived through persecution and difficulties. And then 1 year later, in 1939, the war started, the Second World War, and I lived under the bombing and the experiences of war. And when you are a child of 12, 13 years old and you sit in a shelter and you wait to be slain, I think it is an experience that marks a child. But as a child, you take these things into yourself and you don't question them much. But when you get older, so after the war, when I was 17, 18 years old, all that violence I had experienced had to be dealt with. And I got very depressive, and it was like a deep crisis. I could not believe anymore that there's a sense in life, and it was as if the roots were cut. And then little by little I rediscovered that there is a strength that is stronger.
How did you get out of this crisis?
Then it was I think, because I rediscovered the gospel in its radical sense, that there is the power of love that is stronger than hatred and violence. And I think this was a basic decision for me, because then I said, if I have survived, I must give the little strength that I have to work that violence and hatred and destruction should diminish in our world, and to build peace. So I think that was really a very decisive time for me in my life, between 18 and 20 or so.
You made the decision to become non-violent, but then you met your future husband, Jean Goss, and he was a soldier, or he had been a soldier, who had been involved in killings. How did you deal with that?
Well, my husband Jean was he had a different background. He grew up in a family where the mother was Catholic, was believing, that the father was not believing. And he was more an anarchist, yeah? And he looked for a very independent way of life for his family, and they had changed 25 times. They changed the place where they lived while he was young. And so he had very little formal education. And then when he had to work very early. He was 14 years old when he had to work in factories, and so he thought of how to defend those who have little defense in a factory, and he joined the labor union, and all the time he stood on the side of the exploited, of the smaller ones in a factory. So he defended human life. And then when the war came, they thought that the labor unions of Germany and Italy would refuse to make that war with Hitler, but they had already been recuperated, they could do nothing. So he just became soldier, and he went into war as a French soldier, and they were in a company that was sacrificed to defend the retreat of the French troops. And so there were 120 when they started, and about 20 were left over. Everybody was killed. And so he saw, the front goes back and forth, and he looked at the people whom he killed. And he thought he wanted to kill Hitler and the leaders, but when he saw that he killed fathers of small children or workers like himself, inwardly he became a person who said, well, this cannot be just. I will never be able to kill those who are really responsible. And he was very depressed by this fact that he who defended life should now shoot on these simple people. And so I think he was outwardly outwardly he was a hero because he had killed so well that he was decorated, and inwardly he was a broken person. And then happened to him an experience that in the night of Easter, 1940, well, shortly before they were captured, taken prisoners of war by the Germans, he was exhausted and he went to sleep, and when he woke up, something had happened to him which he could never explain, because I think it was a mystical experience which you cannot explain, and that God had touched his heart, and the person who had been so fervent to defend life and who had experienced death to such an extreme, and he understood that to the extreme violence you have opposed the absolute love of God. And from that moment on, he loved everybody.
Even the enemy?
He loved even the enemy, and he felt that he must show this love wherever he would be in his life or in his profession, and that he should start now. Then he was taken prisoner, and in the prison camp he started to live this love already over against his comrades who came from very different walks of life and very different political inspiration and so forth. And
how did he live then, this love, in a concentration camp?
Well, he tried to be. It was a camp of prisoners of war. It was not a concentration prisoners of war, but of course it was. These camps are guarded by German soldiers or officers, or sometimes SS troops. And so first he saw that he had tried to live this love in a absolute way, and then every evening he should say to himself, well, today again I was not able to live up to it. And so he asked his fellow companions to help him and to say, for instance, when there was little food, for instance, and when he took the biggest potato instead of the smallest, I had asked them, help me to live this love. So if I take the big potato, tell me Jean et ton amour, Jean and your love. And so they tried to help him, and at a long time it was easy, but then there came big problems in every camp. Problems arise, and then one day one of the prisoners had fled and had left the camp, and so somebody had to be responsible, to be punished, and so Jean did say, he said nothing, and in the evening, when they were asleep, one of the fellow prisoners came and said to him, Jean et ton amour, Jean and your love, and you have said nothing, and you are doing nothing about this. And so he said, I was afraid. I had not the courage to say I'm responsible and to take the punishment upon myself. But now that you are speaking to me, now I have the courage. And tomorrow I go and I speak to the person, to the German officer responsible for the camp. And so he went, and this German officer had already observed Jean and had seen how he had been able to deal with difficulties and to overcome problems that were, conflicts that were in the camp, and when Jean told him, I'm responsible, he said, no, not you, go, get out. And it was this German officer who said to his authorities, I'm responsible. He took the place of the prisoner. And when Jean said, when I saw that a German officer, was touched by this love that I'm trying to live, then I was really confirmed that the power of love includes the love of the enemy, and that this is the only way to overcome evil and injustice at its root, in the heart and conscience of the human being. Active nonviolence means not to close your eyes over against an injustice, but to look at it, to analyze it, and to try to overcome this existing injustice or violence, not with counter-violence, but with the power of justice, truth, and love.
Did you ever get involved in violent situations? I mean, were you ever imprisoned?
Well, I have been in Latin America. I have been imprisoned twice. Well, that was the time of the military regimes in Latin America, which in the mid-70s, when really the torturing and the situation was very, very difficult, and when it was very important for European peace workers to show solidarity and be on the side of the human rights groups and the non-violent groups in Latin America.
Where were you imprisoned?
Well, I was arrested in Uruguay at the airport, and also in São Paulo in Brazil. And
what happened to you?
Well, we were arrested at the airport, and I was together with Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, who later on became the leader of the nonviolent movement in Latin America.
Got a Nobel Prize.
And who got in 1980 the Peace Nobel Prize. And a lawyer from Brazil, Mário de Jesus, who had developed the labor union movement in São Paulo and had carried on quite a number of nonviolent actions on the side of the labor of the working population, and we were traveling together, and when we were arrested in São Paulo, and São Paulo was an area really of very, very bad conditions for the prisoners and of a great deal of torture. And Mário de Jesus had already been 3 months in prison and accused with the accusation of violating national security, so they put the hoods over our heads, and so we were blind, and they led us to the police car, and we were brought to a torture center which is close to the airport, and there we were kept, and Mário de Jesus, who had been there before, the Brazilian lawyer, he said, well, it looks as if we would stay there for a long time, because if it is if they say it's an international conspiracy, we will not get out soon. Either perhaps the Cardinal Arns, who at that time was the Archbishop of São Paulo, if he gets the news, he might try to get us out. And
but were you actually tortured?
so we
in one way or
got
another?
only psychological torture.
And what was that?
Well, that was a whole, you know, first of all they start with strong music that has the cries of tortured people in it. Then they put light into your eyes and you have to sit all night without being able to sleep into the night. And then they brought tortured people and they came and threatened us, if you don't speak, you will be beaten. And
You watched it all. This was applied to you.
Well, this is what they did.
Yeah.
And then they brought a tortured person and they said, well, unless you speak, you will be like this. And he was all over blood and shit. And so we were there for some time and we decided
What was your reaction then? How did you survive?
Well, I mean, we decided to have a fast. And Mario de Jesus, he was the only one who could really speak because he was Brazilian. He said, you know, we will fast now for the first 3 days, and we will fast for ourselves, that because we have been violent also, but we also fast for you, because what you do is not just. And he spoke to them very freely. And then, of course, as long as we were together, we prayed together, and of course, one is afraid. That is clear. I think, but I think I was less afraid there. But later on, Cardinal Arns helped us to get out. So after a couple of days, we were liberated.
Looking back on this period in prison, how did you survive the psychological torture they put on you?
Well, I think in a way this was not too much for me. I could take this because I knew I had read a lot about these things, and I knew what might happen. And I think if you do things because of the love of your neighbor, because of the love of the people for whom who are persecuted, and I think you get the strength, and in situations like this you do get the strength. And I remember Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, when he was later on, he was arrested for over a year. He was also tortured and in a very tiny cell and for a long time. And he said, there are only 2 ways to survive. One way is either you let yourself be penetrated by hatred, and you say, when I get out, I will kill so-and-so who are doing this torturing to me. And you survive because your hatred is strong enough to kill you. And then he says, you kill twice. You kill your own conscience and your own human being, and you kill in your heart your adversary. And the other way is that you say that you take your torturer into your prayer, and you say, he is a person who needs more than myself to be liberated.
But isn't that an impossible thing to do when you're tortured?
He said, that gives you the strength to survive, and then you give life twice to yourself as a human being and your own dignity, and you give life to the other. And if you come out and if there's the possibility of meeting and pardoning, the other can also return to his humanity.
Raising of conscience is important in your strategy. I wonder if you can give me an example, preferably that of the Medellin Water Project. Because there, really, the conscience was at stake.
We were working in Latin America, and one of the countries where we were invited was Colombia. And already at that time, there was not yet so much the question of drugs and dealing with drugs, but there was the question of social injustice. And a friend of ours, a Colombian priest, he worked in Medellin in one of the barrios, in one of the poor quarters. And they were situated on hills that surround the city, which is in a valley, the colonial city and the modern city. It's a big city, over 1 million inhabitants, but on the hills and rather steep hills that surround, there are all these poor districts, the barrios as they are called, when people come from the interior who have no possibility to live on the land, and so they come to the city hoping to find work, and they build their huts with bamboo, but there is no urbanization. There are no electricity, no paved routes, no water, no drinking water. And when it rains and the heavy rains come, some of the huts slide, and people live really under very, very, very difficult conditions. And
so what can you do there?
I saw children dying in these conditions. And so this priest had started to bring together, they call the small Christian-based communities. And he read with them the Bible, and he said they discovered that God does not want human beings to subdue to injustice, that He has created them to live in fullness, in dignity, and that He is giving the strength to stand up and to struggle to overcome injustice, but in a special way.
What was the part of the women in the Medellin water project? How did it work?
Yeah, I think the important thing was that these poor women got the courage, the inner courage, to go and work for the life of their children and to get the drinking water to their barrio. And I think it was wonderful to see the creativity in their work, in their project. And so they formed 10 groups, always a couple of women together with their babies, and a specific day and a specific hour, they went down onto the plaza where there was this fountain, this wonderful fountain with pure water running day and night, and with the water that had come over the rim of the basin on the floor. And so the first group approached the fountain and began to wash their children in the dirty water. And then, of course, on the plaza there are the well-to-do women who go to the boutiques, who do their shopping there. And some of them stopped and they said, "Well, you are crazy, your children will die because you wash them in that dirty water." And now the poor women had the possibility to speak to the rich women and to attack their conscience and their heart and to say, "Yes, we know very well our children die because we have." And they told the whole difficulty of not having drinking water. And but the police chased them. But then, quarter of an hour later, the second group came and repeated, and they repeated it 5-6 times, and more policemen came, but also more and more women stopped, and then finally the police wanted to stop that, and one policeman started to beat one of the women with her baby, and a well-to-do woman stepped in between, and she said, "But if your wife would be in the same conditions, don't you think she would do the same thing?" So the police stopped because they did not want to interfere with the rich women. And finally, a little group of poor women and rich women was formed, and a committee, and they discussed, and finally they got an appointment at the city administration. And they also brought a proposal how to solve the issue, and they had convinced their husband to build the water pipes without being paid, so the city government would not have that expense, and the men had been won over for this project, and finally they could achieve this first step in a liberating project. But I think it was so important because they did not come with fists and threatening the rich women and you are responsible for our poverty. No, they said, these women, like we, have a conscience and a heart, and they can change.
For their conscience, yes.
And from that time on, the poor women continued to struggle for urbanization and greater dignity.